Hi, I'm Dean Bushmiller, and this is Common Application Vulnerabilities. If this is your first vulnerabilities or threats video, please watch the free overview video before beginning this session right here. So let's get started. Now, if you're buying applications versus building applications, and we have to make that distinction here, but if you're buying applications, you're not in control of the source code. That's all there is to it at that moment in time. You're not in control of the source code. So what do? Okay. Well, you search the vulnerabilities database and you go into the National Vulnerabilities Database, and you can get to that through CVE.org or the old way you can get through, and you search for the vulnerabilities inside of there. And then you also use an internal scanner. Well, you really don't search for the vulnerabilities there. What happens is you buy a scanner, and the scanner has its connection up into the National Vulnerability Database. So that internal scanner will say, these are your assets that you have, and these are the patches that they're missing. And so here's their vulnerabilities. And so then you patch, and that's what you do. Now, if you drill down into that and you go a little bit further, you'll find out that common vulnerabilities and exposures, the CVEs, have specific weaknesses. So if we look inside of this description and you scroll down here just a little tiny bit. Oh, that's not good enough. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we can look at it this way. You can see the weakness there, and it'll give you a CWE identifier. Okay, so that's a weakness enumeration that you can get. And that's really where we're going today with common application vulnerabilities, because these are the applications where you control the source code. So this is important. So hang out with me here for just a second. Now, when we're in control of the source code, okay, now what happens? Well, we need to understand how to systematically address application vulnerabilities, because now we're in control of this, and we have to build this into the system of all the other applications that we're running in the organization so they can get a threat, vulnerability, a risk assessment going. Now, the application vulnerability processing is a little bit different here for different applications. It's different for the web. Like if you're going to do pure web, and we're going to do a little bit of web, we're going to see some web today, then you'd go to OWASP and look there. If you were doing something inside of the cloud, you'd still have to deal with the application that you have, but there's a wrapper around that is going to have platform-specific tools that you may be able to scan, deploy vulnerabilities, protection mechanisms or controls that need to be put in place, or maybe even update your software. So there's a platform specific. We're talking about the local install of applications, not necessarily on the client side of things, mostly on the server side where we're building applications. Now, it may be that that application also gets deployed down to the client side. Today, with the proliferation of web services, we try to centralize all that application and put a web interface on the front of it. Okay, and so that's where we come back to the CWE. This is common weakness enumeration. Now, there are specifications and organizational systems for all of these weaknesses, and we have to develop that system because we have to work with that system and figure out what the type of flaw is that we're dealing with here. And we're going to get good at that internally. There are over 900 types, and we're not going to look at all 900 of them. You'd be drowning in this stuff. But remember, each CVE ID has at least one CWE. And when you're doing your own application vulnerabilities, you have to identify the CWEs for your application where you own the source code. Okay, so why do we process the application vulnerabilities in this way? Well, this will help us overall for vulnerability reduction. This will give us insight into the common root causes and drive valuable feedback into our software development lifecycle and architectural planning. And the goal is to eliminate that class of defect in our applications that we have. By the way, I've talked to some of my friends at Google, and they say that they have eliminated all cross-site request forgery flaws completely systemically for them. They do not have them internally at all. because of the process that they put in place where they basically say you can't code that way. And when you try to code that way, all of their scanning tools that they have in place will catch that way of coding the bad way that will end up and lead to that vulnerability. And it basically rejects your code. So you automatically get rejected at that point. But fewer vulnerabilities are going to equal out to fewer issues to manage after the deployment. And that's going to save time, resources, money, all of those things. We can also look for a trend analysis. So those data trends, let's say we have a bad programmer. We just hired somebody and they do this bad thing. Well, we can go ahead and say, okay, well, we're going to fix that one person. But what happens if it's an organizational issue? Let's say that we're really horrible at this class of attack. We can look at the data trends that enable us to focus our security efforts long term. Hey, you know what? We're going to send everybody to cross-site request forgery school at OWASP or something like that. We can also look at the exploitability insights because certain weaknesses attract adversarial attention and they will go after those over and over and over again. From a customer standpoint, especially if we're building this application internally and selling it to somebody on the outside, if we build up this process and we claim these CWEs and say, hey, here's what our problem is, then we're going to gain customer trust there because that transparency is going to show a commitment to the product security that we have here. Now, speaking of transparencies, something has happened within the past couple of years from the CISA. These are called known exploit vulnerabilities, and there's a catalog of these things. This is all the publicly available exploits that are out there. Now, if we zoom out here, and I know this was a little bit of a squint-a-thon for you here, but what you'll see is that catalog of exploits is mapped directly to CWE identifiers. And the biggest ones get the most play here. Those are the ones where if we go back into the CVE IDs and we look at the list of CVEs that have this particular kind of CWE problem, of those, which ones are the most exploited, the most known exploits against them, and then that's this list right here. So what you want to do is you say, okay, well, which ones do I process first? If I'm a programmer, you want to go toward the high side of things and go after those things. And you can look at that, and I'll show you the details on that later on. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do a CWE tour of the top 25. I'm going to organize them so you're only going to see about 11 or 12 of them. At the end of this, if you get the mind map, you can go through the example walkthrough of actually doing a prioritization of this based upon the CWEs and the CVE identifiers. And then I'm going to ask you the question of what controls do you use and how do you put those controls in place in a very basic stance for your organization. So that's what we're going for. I hope you'll join me for the entire presentation.